All right, we're live. Hi, everybody out there. Hope you all are cozy wherever you are or keeping cool here in the summer. My name is Aide. I'm the Director of Programs for Born This Way Foundation. Born This Way was co-founded by Lady Gaga and her mother Cynthia to support mental wellness among young people and help empower them to build a kinder, braver world. I'm so excited to welcome you to our community conversation today on how to be there for your people while protecting your own wellness. This is the first in a series of conversations we have planned for BIPOC Mental Health Month that focuses on celebrating culture, highlighting specific needs across communities, and sharing resources to meet those needs. I'm thrilled that you all are with us today, and I'm so excited for you to meet each one of these incredible people and interact with us directly on this platform. Today's conversation is all about how to be there for your people. One of the most wonderful things about being human is the ability to support someone else through challenges. Oftentimes, the first thing we do when we're going through something tough and ready for help is to reach out to a loved one. And when we're on the other side of that conversation, most of us want to help, but many of us feel intimidated or like we just don't know how. So I'm excited to chat today about that topic with these incredible folks on the line. So please share your comments and questions with us, and we'll try to get to them all live during this conversation. We'll also share a recap of today's conversation on channelkindness.org, so be sure to check that out. So now I would love to introduce you to each one of our panelists today. And so I'll kick it over to each of them so that they can put in their own words exactly who they are. We'll start with Erica. Hey, Erica.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being here. Would love for you to tell everyone out there who you are.
Excellent. My name is Erica Woodland. I'm the founding director of the National Queer and Trans Therapists of Color Network. And I am a psychotherapist and healing justice practitioner. I use he, him, his pronouns. And yes, I'm super excited about today's conversation.
Thank you, Erica. Thank you for being here. I'll kick it over to Shannon. Hey, Shannon.
Hi, Alex. Thanks so much for having me. I'm Shannon Berry. I am a writer and a performer here in LA. And I started writing my diary posts up on my Instagram and have gathered a bunch of readers from that. And I use she, her pronouns.
Good to meet you, Shannon. Thank you for being here. Hey, Lorenzo.
Hey, how you doing? I'm grateful to be here. I'm Lorenzo Lewis, founder and CEO of the Confess Project, which is a national grassroots movement that is committed to building a culture of mental health for young men of color by training barbers to be mental health advocates. I'm grateful to be here today and just glad to share and then obviously be a voice for so many.
Thank you, Lorenzo. Thank you for being here. Hi, Natalie.
Hey, Alex. Thank you for having me. Hey, everyone watching. I am Natalie Gutierrez, and pronouns she, her, hers, and I'm a Puerto Rican Latinx, native New Yorker, trauma therapist, and super passionate about the work that I do, primarily with BIPOC.
Thank you, Natalie. Thank you for being here. Hi, Jennifer.
Hi there. Hi, I'm Jennifer Mullan. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I am the very proud founder of Decolonizing Therapy. I am a clinical psychologist as well, and I'm really committed to unpacking systemic oppression all the way around and systemic inequities related to mental health and the well-being of queer Indigenous people of color. I'm really happy to be here.
Thank you for being here. Again, thank you all for being here. We want to use this opportunity to highlight, especially for young people, that even if you feel you're unable to talk about your mental health at home, there are people who can and want to check in with you. So a great place to start is by visiting us at bornthisway.foundation and checking out our Get Help page that features a wealth of resources and tips. So just know resources are out there. I want to kick it over to our first question. And I think I want to talk to Erica and Lorenzo about this. If someone is unwilling, and anyone else, of course, please jump in. But if someone is unwilling or unable to get a therapist because they're intimidated or financially incapable, what other resources might be available? Erica, if you're cool, I'll start with you.
Thank you. I really appreciate this question because what we know is that, as a therapist, I think therapy can be a really useful tool for healing, but it's not the only tool. And sometimes people need other strategies that are more community-based and just held in a different container. And the reality is the communities that I work with, which is queer and trans, Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, there are so many systemic barriers. And so most of our mental health care, our emotional well-being comes outside of the mental health system. So there are a number of resources and practices and strategies that our folks have been developing out for generations to ensure that our mental health is on point. A few resources that I want to shout out that I think are doing really great transformative work. QTPOC Mental Health. So they have a Facebook group where they provide peer support. They also run the webpage Rest for Resistance, where they have all kinds of blogs about self-care and activism and social justice. I'm also thinking a lot about podcasts these days. I get a lot of my mental health care from podcasts like the La Cura podcast that's hosted by Mi Gente. I listen to that regularly. I'm also a big fan of The Read. They talk about mental health a lot.
Yes.
I'm also thinking about organizations such as the Black Emotional and Mental Health Collective, BEAM. They're doing really great work around building out mental health literacy in Black community. And then the last group that I'll shout out is Queer Crescent Healing. And they're doing really amazing healing arts and healing justice work with queer Muslims. So again, to just lift up that therapy is an important tool. It's not the only tool. And we have so many amazing community members who are building out this work for us.
Thanks, Erica. Lorenzo.
Yes, absolutely. And just picking off of what Erica stated, it's just be grateful that there are so many other resources here in our community. Particularly, as she stated, I know BEAM, Black Emotional Mental Health Collective, does a very great job of providing that literacy and that peer support, I think, on social media, where we know tons of folks are using technology to also the center of the work that we do. Again, as I spoke around, we are training barbers. Technically, we're taking, everyday folks in the epicenter in the Black community, training them on active listening, communication, stigma reduction, using those as tools and also using that as a way to help assist their community members and themselves. So we have a private social media group as well for barbers, but collectively as well for their clients to interact as well. I also want to give a shout out as well to another organization that is particularly focusing around the population we serve, Henry Health, which is also a culturally sensitive app now that is supporting Black men and families as well. And I believe that they're doing great work in how they're supporting our communities and the demographics that we're working with. So I think, those in a nutshell, along with what Erica has stated, I think could be great tools because the reality is, and it particularly was, African-American men, a lot of it when you think about just, the identity and the way that masculinity shows up, and also looking at our issues and the systemic issues that we face, the truth of the matter, a lot of them just won't ever go to therapy, right? So we truthfully have to think about how do we empower those that are on the ground already to give that support, to lead, and also to see how that they can help to heal themselves. And I think that's part of the work that we're doing, along with, honoring that there are, culturally sensitive therapists that are out there that can support them too.
Thank you so much. And I'll just add too, those are all incredible. And as we chat, I believe right below us, we're sharing out all of these resources that our panelists are sharing and more about each of them so that you can learn more. My next question, what does it mean to really be there for someone if they open up to you about their struggles, especially if you're the only person they've really opened up to? I'd love, Shannon, to hear from you about this.
Sure thing, Alex. So unlike so many of these incredible people on this panel with me, I am not a professional. I am just a person who started journaling and then started posting those things more publicly on my Instagram. And through that, I've gotten a lot of people reaching out to me, sometimes just as a person who they think, oh, maybe she'll understand what I'm going through, or they read something I posted and it struck a nerve with them. And sometimes people reaching out to me almost as if I were a professional. So I think for me, really being there for someone, especially if I'm the only person that they've reached out to, is understanding that line of, okay, I am a person on the internet who you may or may not know, and being grateful that somebody chose to open up to me, being supportive or empathetic, but strictly telling them that I'm there to listen, maybe offer some friendly advice if it's a small enough problem, but knowing that there are many times where I've had to tell a young person, I think you need to take this to a therapist if you have one, or a trusted adult, or a guidance counselor at school. And so that's a pretty strict guideline I've set up for myself, just operating within the online community the way I do. But I'm really interested in what these professionals think about all of that, because I think that could really help me too in my online community.
Yeah. Natalie, I would love to hear from you too.
I think when we are supporting, when someone has come to us wanting our support, I think it's important that we're not minimizing their experience, that we are holding space for them, but also making sure that we are preventing secondary trauma within ourselves, because that's also very important. And that's true for every, like, true for the peer, and that's also true for anyone that's in a caretaker role, that we are holding space for people, and we are holding space for them with an open heart, with love in our face, and not judging them, not minimizing their experience, and showing up for them, and also making sure that we're caring for ourselves in the process, that we are showing up for people, making sure that our bodies are also feeling safe. Because when we feel safe in our bodies, and we're feeling regulated in our bodies, and we're feeling calm in our bodies, it communicates the message to the person that we are safe. And they will naturally then feel safe. In the same way that if, we're feeling super angst, the other person's going to pick up on that energy, and they're going to start to also become anxious. And so it's incredibly important that we're also making sure that we feel safe in our bodies as we're holding space for other people, and also checking in with what feels okay for us, making sure that we're preventing that secondary trauma that I was talking about earlier.
Oh, Natalie, that is such a good point, that like, even if you know exactly what to say, before you do it, if you feel a little bit nervous, hey, maybe you take a couple deep breaths, calm yourself, and then have the chat. That's really important. Thank you, Natalie. Jennifer.
Yeah, I think it was said before, but I'm really big on understanding that it's like a container, and that we're there to like supportively hold space for another or many others, depending on who it is and who's reflecting back their pain to you. I think it's also important to realize that someone is sharing with us because they feel safe with us. And that is a big burden, and that we need to also take care of ourselves, right? So I think it's important to consider community care. So I know we focus on self-care a lot, which is really important because we need to fill up our own tank, no doubt. And we want to make sure that we're consistently checking in with our capacity as well as what that other person needs. I think that sometimes even myself, if I don't check myself, like I can make assumptions about what my loved ones or family members want or need, without really like checking in with them and saying, well, how can I help you with this? Do you just need a listening ear? Do you need feedback? Do you need resources? Do you need a hug? And especially right during the pandemic and then all the violence after, it was really just a place of like, oh my gosh, we need physical, healthy, consensual touch. And that's not always possible, right? Because some people's immune systems would not allow for that, or it's not safe. So I think that we might have downplayed physical touch and just being around people that we care about, and just asking. Sometimes we just need to ask and we'll get that answer. Sometimes people don't even know what those answers are until they're asked that question, what do you need?
Yeah, thank you, Jennifer.
Yeah.
Erica.
I just really want to echo and reinforce everything that was shared. I've been thinking a lot about the difference between kind of the day-to-day support and then when someone comes to you and they're in crisis, because those are different strategies that you're going to have to employ. And, because we're all in some level of crisis at this point, I think it's really important to be deeply connected to crisis resources, right? So I'm thinking about Trans Lifeline, crisis text. I'm thinking about how you assess for yourself when one of your loved ones is in crisis, how you assess when you're in crisis, and how you get really clear about what you can hold and what you can't hold. I have been really fortunate to be hanging out virtually with some young people who are having some really interesting conversations about boundaries and consent and how we actually are mindfully sharing certain things in a way that's not triggering and activating people. Everything that we're having to kind of ingest right now through the media and everything that we're being asked to process is so activating to our nervous systems, and we're all just trying to figure out how to take care of ourselves as best we can. And so some of those conversations about even asking permission, like if you want to reach out to someone for support, asking, do you have space to hold this for me? I might be sharing something that could be triggering for you. And I learned, those strategies just from witnessing young people navigate care with each other.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Erica. Lorenzo. Oh, I think you're on mute, Lorenzo.
Yes, Shannon, I want to make sure that I'm being clear on the question. We are speaking about the shock or discomfort. Is that correct?
Yeah, and how to approach sort of being there for someone else.
Okay, well, good question, really good question. I want to make sure. So yes, I think really, as the other panelists have stated, being clear about what we can accept and what we can deal with. One thing that I commonly say, particularly, like I said, I work with a lot of African American males and particularly like their family members, and we have been raised traditionally like in an environment around like strict religion and pushing things to the side and like. Also this thing around, overbearing like resiliency, right? Like, and not really being careful about how we're really taking care of ourselves. So I think it's, really important to really take time with ourselves as well before we really try to take care of others. And, I always say that like, in order for us to just have a high frequency and a cup that's overfilling, that we must, attend to ourselves as well before we try to take care of others. And I think that's sometimes can be harder than expected, but I think that's a good practice as well.
Yeah, thank you, Lorenzo. Yeah, agreed with that. And a common used analogy is, when you're on an airplane, right? And they tell you in the safety briefing, if the oxygen masks come down, put yours on first and then help someone. Your gut instinct, especially if you're a parent or caring for someone, you want to put the mask on them first. But first you need to put your mask on, because if you don't do that, you're not going to be able to help anybody else. So I really appreciate that point, Lorenzo. My next question, I think I'll talk to Dr. Mullan and Natalie, and then of course anyone else feel free to chime in. But what should we be aware of when your loved one has received a mental health diagnosis?
I can start, Natalie. I'm sure we'll piggyback off each other either way. I would say that one of the first things is that I try to communicate with people about is that it's not who you are, right? Like your diagnosis is not a reflection of who you are as a person. Because some people receive a diagnosis and they suddenly feel like a lightness. They feel like, oh, great. Okay, at least I know what's going on. At least I have a better understanding that this isn't all made up in my head. There's those folks, right? But then there's also folks, and I probably work with more folks on this other end, where it's like, oh my gosh, I have a diagnosis. Now this feels like a life sentence. Like this feels, so the first thing I want to say is that it's not a reflection always of who we are. It's a point in time. It's something we're going through, and we may need support long-term, or it could be a shorter term solution. But either way, we also have to look at society around us, right? Like, what is happening? How long have I received this level of stress or trauma or violence in my life? Whether it is race-based trauma, whether it is a depression diagnosis, whether it's post-traumatic stress disorder, no matter what it is, I think it's really important to first look at what's happening in society and not just to blame the person, right, with that diagnosis, or blame yourself as well. So those are some of the thoughts that come to mind.
Thank you, Dr. Mullan. Natalie.
Speak it, Jen, speak it. And to add to that, I just want to say, the whole diagnosis thing, I think we need to humanize the human experience. I think, I've had people that I've worked with that come in with a, previous diagnosis of borderline personality, bipolar, post-traumatic stress, and all this. And I don't even say post-traumatic stress disorder anymore, because the disorder part feels so like it's pathologizing how many folks respond to trauma, to the traumas that Jen has named, racism and all of that, to the traumas of sexual violence, to the just thinking of all, any and all the traumas that you can experience: poverty trauma, migrant trauma, just all the traumas in abroad, across the spectrum. Of course, someone is going to choose booze and any sort of addiction. Of course, people are going to self-harm. Of course, there is going to be people that are super anxious and struggling with depression and mania. And that is just how you're responding to the traumas that you have endured and the life experience that have caused you harm. Of course, that is going to be how you deal with certain things. And so what I try to do with the people that I serve is to remind them that whatever behaviors that they are doing is really some sort of attempted solution to a real problem, which is the trauma that they have gone through, and if they're a person in a marginalized group are going through. I'm not sure how any one of us can, live our best lives when we are in an oppressed society. Like, I just don't know how that is possible fully. And I don't think our healing itself, we can heal ourselves. We can do as much therapy as we want to. Mm-hmm. But it is always going to be incomplete if we do not address systemic issues that are causing and trickling down and causing these issues in individuals. So I think the mental health diagnosis itself, I think we need to humanize these diagnoses instead of just pathologizing it and saying, oh, this person has this, oh, this person has that. Yeah, this person is naturally going to have this given their entire life experience with various different traumas.
Those are such huge and important points, Natalie. Thank you. Lorenzo, were you trying to jump in there?
Well, no, the more I'm just really blown away. Just thank you again, Natalie. It was just really resonated with me. I think personally, I'm just thinking about myself, right? A Black man living with major depression and going through childhood trauma and juvenile incarceration, and just thinking about, different experiences that I experienced and which engaged me to do the work that I do now, but particularly around, like you said, she said, really humanizing the experience, because I can remember just being as a young person where, because of, I think, the behavior outputs of what the depression, formulated with the anger and some of those things, it was often overlooked. And it was also deemed as inappropriate when it was really something that should have just gotten more care and more attention towards. And I think that's another part of, again, what, systemically how our communities and what our communities now have come to, where we've alienated those who truthfully have, had parents incarcerated, have went through trauma, has, grew up in urban neighborhoods that had a lot of violence. And then we, suppose for them to just keep on pushing along when we realize that ACEs and childhood trauma is a real thing, right? Like that people truthfully are going to be sick, that it brings illness to the body, right? That it will create relationships and distrust and, just multiple other things. So I'm just, thank you for that feedback. But it took me on a personal roller coaster, which I think that's really would resonate with a lot of people here that's watching us today.
Yeah, I'd love to get in on this question too.
Please, yeah.
Because I think there's this larger conversation around, the mental health field and the diagnosing and kind of where that comes from, and just really understanding, like everything else, therapy can be a tool, and it can be a tool to control and harm, right? And historically, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual has been used to really harm communities who are experiencing systemic and structural violence. So at the end of the day, we have to always remember our own inner wisdom and guidance. And I know I'm thinking about families that I've worked with over time who had a family member who had really severe and chronic mental illness. And oftentimes what the practitioners were advising them to do was not useful or helpful, but they had already built out strategies that were useful with a family member who, was prescribed medication but didn't want to take it. And so how do we actually, I love this piece around humanizing, but also interrupt the power dynamic inside of the mental health system and the medical industrial complex. Because, for us in our work, we actually use a healing justice frame versus mental health, because it just gives us more spaciousness to actually be really intentional and clear that we're survivors of structures of violence, right? And our responses to those structures are the most human thing that we can have. But we live in a society where our human response to historical trauma, our human response to structural violence is criminalized, right? Specifically for Black people. And so I just want to add that to the conversation, which is I am a therapist all day long. And I also know that I represent a field that is often responsible for not actually helping those who are most marginalized.
Thank you, Erica.
I just wanted to
Shannon.
add one thing. Everyone's pretty much touched on this a little bit, but I also have a chronic illness. I have Crohn's disease, and I know when I was diagnosed with Crohn's, a lot of autoimmune and particularly stomach disorders, people think that the fault is on you, like, oh, you didn't eat well enough, you didn't do enough yoga. And I also know through experience and just having talked to my friends and people online that with mental disorders and mental diagnoses, the blame is placed on the individual so much more. Like people think, oh, you're just not taking the right supplements or thinking about things in the right way. And obviously going to therapy, having cognitive help, all those things can be helpful. But I think really when it comes to diagnosis, it's like Natalie and Dr. Jennifer said, that we have to really take the focus off the individual of okay, we don't need to be placing blame on anyone. It's not a situation of you should have thought about this differently, or you should have been holding yourself differently or conducting yourself differently. It's very much, this is what you've been placed with right now. How do we make you feel better moving forward?
Thank you, Shannon. And to everyone out there watching right now, I just want to remind you, if you have questions that you'd like to hear from us before the end of today's chat, please feel free to ask below. I'd love to keep going here. My next question, if you feel caught off guard when a friend or loved one opens up about mental health struggles, what are some ways to learn more and deal with initial feelings of shock or discomfort? And I'd love to open this up to everybody. But Erica, if it's cool, I'll start with you.
Absolutely. I really appreciate this question. I'm gonna answer it personally and not with my professional hat on, because we're all just experiencing so much. I really have come back to my old school peer support skills around just listening and not actually feeling like I have to do anything beyond that, and to really, really be in deep appreciation that listening is enough, holding space is enough, and witnessing people when they're having a very hard time can be deeply transformative in the long term, if not in the moment. I regularly in my work and in my support that I'm doing on a peer level, come back to the breath. I use the breath a lot to just help regulate my nervous system. And also when people share things with me that are shocking or just like really overwhelming, sometimes even just saying that can be really affirming, not in a way to shut people down, but if somebody shares something that's just really awful, just even being able to share my authentic response while still holding that space, I think can be really, really useful. I spoke a little bit earlier about kind of boundaries and being clear about what you can and can't hold. But I also think that when I am the primary support person for someone who's in crisis, I make sure that I build out my personal support system because I'm going to have places to go to process that vicarious trauma that Natalie talked about, and to also just deal with my own reaction and responses. So I often think about concentric circles of care. And if I'm providing care for someone, then that means someone has to provide care for me, and someone has to provide care for that person, or a whole community is providing that care. So those are some of the things that I think about just personally at this time, because so much is being asked of us because we're all experiencing a number of collective crises, and then the communities I'm a part of are disproportionately impacted.
Thank you, Erica. I'd love, Natalie, to hear from you about this.
Thank you, Erica. I don't feel like there's so much I can add to it. Erica said was so on point. Nervous system, when he said, bringing it back to the breath is restorative, right? The breath is what we first take when we come into the world, and that is what helps to channel. It helps to begin to create a shift in the nervous system so that we can kind of calm down. And I think, I've been on the receiving end when I've been shocked, the initial kind of like, oh my gosh, this has happened, or this person is going through this and I didn't know. And for me, it's what has been helpful is reminding myself, one, taking it back to the breath and calming my body, but also knowing that I'm in danger in this moment, that this person, unless I am, right? But what this person is telling me right now is not threatening. And so I think it's important to be aware of that threat response that we're having in our body when we are initially anxious, or whatever it is that we're feeling, any sort of kind of arousal that we're feeling in our body around that we kind of are just cognizant of it, that we are aware that it's happening in our body so that we can nurture it and take care of it and remind ourselves we're safe. Because if we are having a response of, let's say, anxiety, can you only imagine what the person that is giving us this information is feeling? And so it goes back to this co-regulation, this sort of energy exchange, peer-to-peer, where there is just love there. There is openness there and a hold there. I think that our presence that we can give, our energy, is the biggest gift that we can give someone when they're coming to us, needing our support and trusting us that we can trusting us to give it to them.
Beautifully said. Thank you, Natalie. Dr. Mullan.
Yeah, I have to also co-sign everything that Erica and Natalie mentioned is right on. And I always direct people back to their breath, back home to self. And so I suppose that if we take it from there, so after we're breathing and after we're conscious of regulating, or whether we're anxious or overwhelmed, I would also say that it's important to realize that lovingly, that this isn't about us, right? And I say this to people all the time, maybe it's not about you, it's not about you, or maybe it's not about me. and just sort of taking us away from this very individualistic, self-contained kind of like vision that a lot of us may have, you know, including myself. I just want to put that out there. And it's a constant process to have to come back and say, wait, this person is sharing this with me, whether or not I agree or I'm feeling it. Can I just be here now with what it is that they're bringing? How can I make sure that they feel emotionally safe and contained, you know, and how can I do that? Which is why I love what Lorenzo is doing so much, because it's like people are going to go to the barbershop, right? Like, you know, you're going to go and get your hair cut regardless. And so how wonderful to have people there that are trained to have these kind of conversations in a safe container. So the next piece I would say is really making sure that we then get our support afterwards. Like if something feels too overwhelming, I think it's really important to check in with a friend, to check in with your own therapist, to check in with your, you know, your own support system. As Erica was mentioning, the concentric circles and like that overlapping support, like we got each other. You know, and I know a lot of our indigenous peoples say like in La Quech, and it's in part of my tradition as well. And it's like, I am you, you are me, and we are us. And that very much resonates when I think about this kind of care, this kind of collective care. It's like, how do we continue to have us? How do we continue to hold this space? So I think that the conversation is always ever evolving, you know, and it is also, I think I also want to point out there that it's based in the moment. You know, if you're going through a lot and you don't have capacity, I think it's okay to like hold it a little bit and then like tag team another friend to come in or tag team another family member that's safe. Like we also don't have to do it all. And I think that for Black, Indigenous people of color, like that's very common to feel like we have to like carry everything on our shoulders. So yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Mullan.
Yeah.
Lorenzo.
Yeah, I'm really just applaud, just, you know, again, listening to such wonderful folks here. But I'm more as I'm listening to that, I'm gonna take it back just to like the work that I do individually. Like I said, we train these guys to not be experts, right? To simply be advocates, and I think that's a very meaningful way to show up in their communities and with the folks that they love and care for. And also, you know, I think just because they are advocates, realizing that we do have, you know, Dr. Natalie, we do have your queer and colored trans network folks that are truly trained and that are clinicians to support. So that's the other part of really like making sure that their capacity, knowing how far it goes with you, and getting them to that database. That's one of the things that we really support is that handoff and doing that warm handoff. Because once someone really opens up, like, you know, that could be a life-altering shift for you, and it's, you know, you just came in to come to work, or just somebody in the community, right? Activists and, you know, educators and, you know, other frontline, you know, heroes and sheroes that are out here, you know, in front of, you know, young people every day, like training them to understand, like, hey, we can do these warm handoffs, and knowing that it's okay for you not to know it all, but to know it's a community around us that truly can support us in those places where it may seem vacant. So.
Thank you, Lorenzo. Shannon.
Yeah. So again, I'm not a professional, and all of this advice has been so helpful and illuminating. But just kind of coming at it from a friend's point of view, I think nobody wants anybody they love to be in pain. And so I think it can be so tempting when somebody comes to you and says, I'm in pain. And a lot of times people treat diagnoses as the proof of someone being in pain, right? Like, I'm in pain and I can prove it because this professional told me this is the way you're hurt or you're hurting. And I think our temptation can be to downplay it because we don't want that person to be in pain. We don't want to feel guilty that we didn't know. Or so I think that can cause a lot of discomfort. Like, we don't want to be told, hey, I've been hurting this whole time and you didn't know about it, or you assumed everything was fine, or you know what. And so I think for me, at least, trying to realize, and I went through this sort of on the opposite side with my Crohn's diagnosis, and that was very heavy for a lot of the people in my life to realize, oh, she really, really is in this much pain. And while that was so validating for me, that can be really scary for the people around you. And I think when friends have come to me with mental health diagnoses, it's hurtful in a way that you didn't realize that they were going through this. And I think we have to make space for ourselves to say, okay, of course I don't want my friend to be hurting. That's not a comfortable thing to hear. But also, this person has likely been dealing with these feelings for way longer than anybody knew. It started way before their diagnosis. They're not going to be different. This isn't, you finding out something and now everything is changing. This person has been dealing with this and struggling with this, and now they have a name, and that can be a really beautiful thing. And to center it back to hope that while diagnoses can be stressful, they can feel oftentimes overwhelming, they're also the starting point for a lot of healing and sometimes medications that can help. And I know, at least with my Crohn's, being diagnosed feels like one of the most defining moments in my life, because it felt like the time that everyone started taking me really seriously. So knowing that there can be power in having an answer, there can be power in having hope, and that there can be power in owning the things that you're struggling with or hurting, and that we as the support community for a person going through that need to meet them where they are and be grateful that they have an answer and be willing to help them move forward in that healing. And also, like everyone else said, take your moment, be there for them, and then remember that it's not about yourself. And then it can be about yourself later when you go call your mom and tell them, oh my gosh, this happened, but in that moment, what they're going through isn't about you, and you can have your feelings about it, and that's okay, but to hold space for them.
Thanks, Shannon. And I just want to underscore to everyone here today, on behalf of myself and on behalf of our entire Born This Way Foundation community watching, how grateful and how honored we all are for each of you to be here and share your time and your presence with all of us and all of your knowledge. So I just want to reiterate my thanks for that. And again, you can ask our panelists questions below, and I'll give you a couple more minutes to do that. And while people are asking questions, I would love for everyone on the panel to share where everyone watching can support you and support your work. Natalie, if it's cool, I'll start with you.
Yes. So I have an Instagram account. I'm not big on social media, so Instagram is as far as I go right now. My handle is at Natalie Gutierrez LMFT, spelled GUTIERREZ. But I imagine there's not that many Natalie Gutierrez LMFTs out there. So that's my Instagram handle. And then my website, if you ever wanted to visit, was www.traumacounselingnyc.com.
Thank you. Lorenzo.
Yeah, so luckily enough, we do share all the platforms that are available: Twitter, Instagram. I think our Instagram probably is the busiest. On Facebook, but we can be found at the Confess Project on Twitter. It is the Confess Proj, and you find us at www.theconfessproject.com. You drop us a message. We also have a number where we can be, reached at. It's listed on our website. And yeah, we look forward to any way that we can support our community members, barbers, and our men, their families. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Lorenzo. Shannon.
I am on all the social medias. You can find me on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, all at the same handle, which is at Barry_happy, and that's Barry with an A, which is my last name. And DM me on my Instagram is probably the easiest place to reach me, and I have all my writing categorized in my highlights, so it's quite easy if you're looking for something specific. But if not, DM me. I would love to talk to everyone and anyone.
Thank you. Erica.
Yes, so you can check out the National Queer and Trans Therapists of Color Network on our website, which is www.nqttcn.com. And we are on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at NQTTCN.
Thank you. Dr. Mullan.
You can most connect with me on either Instagram or my website. So on IG, that would be at Decolonizing Therapy, and website would be www.drjennifermullan.com.
Thank you. All right. So thank you to everyone out there. I've got a couple of really great questions to ask everyone. The first question is from Amanda. How do you cope with mental health and chronic health conditions? As a person living with lupus, it's not easy. Anyone have thoughts they want to jump in on this?
Sure. I have both mental health and chronic health conditions. And I think one of the biggest things, especially I know with lupus and with Crohn's, which is what I have, fatigue is a huge part of it. And I know that that can overlap with a lot of mental health conditions as well. And so I think for me, centering on rest, especially trying to be a writer and an actress, there's so much pressure about the grind and are you working as hard as you possibly can? And I think really coming back to rest and knowing that if I have a day where I stay in bed or I am, having a self-care day, that's not a failure and that's just as important as any other active thing I could be doing to further my career.
Thank you, Shannon. Any other thoughts on this question from the panel? All right.
Yeah,
Erica.
I appreciate this question because I think a lot of people actually are struggling with chronic illness, mental health issues, and we actually just don't talk about it. And I've found that the more I've been open with people in my life about my chronic illness or mental health challenges, the more I realize that other people are having the same experience. And I actually want to just name really explicitly the way ableism is functioning in our society, right? So everything that Shannon just shared about honoring your needs, it's how do you do that in the context of the grind and capitalism, right? That's very much by design. So there are a lot of great people who are talking about and thinking about disability justice as a frame. And I have not only integrated that into my life, but in my friend groups, we're having different conversations around our needs and how to get support from each other so that you don't feel alone. And also you don't feel so isolated, like I'm the only one with a chronic illness. I know once I started talking about my chronic illness, I was like, oh, actually all of my friends have some kind of long-term physical health issue, but we just never talked about it. And I think specifically for Black folks, that's very, very common because then we're going to have to just add a whole other level of marginalization to our experience.
Thanks, Erica. Our next question is from Katie. Katie writes, this conversation is so powerful. Thank you, Katie. I agree. They continue to ask, how can you support someone who is going through something that you have never gone through before or can't even imagine them going through that? How can we show empathy when we have no idea what they are going through?
Yeah, I can. Oh, go ahead, Natalie. I'm sorry. Okay. I love this question because it takes me back to my peer educator days and bystander intervention and some it's the basic needs, what does someone need? And I think that safety is the first thing. Even if we don't know what someone else is going through, can we provide them a safe, reasonably confidential, as long as there's not a major risk to themselves, a reasonably confidential space in which we feel like we can hold them down, whatever that means, right? So how can you just show up, listen, and you can use some good old therapy 101 skills, which is restating, okay, so it sounds like you're saying that you don't want to do anything about A, B, C, and D, but this is really, really painful. And this breakup is leading to all this depression and anxiety. And the reality is that when we look beneath the surface, most of us may not be able to identify with the topic or the issue, but you could probably identify with the feeling. And the feeling is being out of control or being lonely or lost or feeling discriminated against, whatever the feeling is. I think that that's where we need to probably go in and connect with that person is with the feeling. And remember that we don't need to have answers for everything. I don't. I'm always learning. We don't need to have answers for everything. Sometimes just being able to listen without as much judgment as possible in a safe container is usually what people need. Yeah. Nat, what were you going to add?
Listening, absolutely, and also asking. And I think, Jen, you have mentioned this before in one of the questions, right? Asking for what they need, asking for, asking how you can be helpful to them. Because I think it's important when we are supporting other people that we support them on their terms and how and they deem to be supportive, because what feels supportive to us may not feel supportive to them, especially when in the question it's you haven't had the experience that they're having, and so, or that they've had. And so I think it's important to check in with them, to ask, and to actually even be honest and say, I don't know how I can support you, but I want to. And so how can I, what feels helpful for you? And kind of just navigating it that way.
Thank you, Natalie.
Somebody mentioned this before. I can't quite remember who it was, that they have been listening to podcasts lately as part of their mental health. Was that Erica, maybe?
Erica.
And so I found this also very helpful with, I had a friend who went through a diagnosis, and I had never experienced it. It was hard for me to even conceptualize it. And obviously I was there for my friend and listened to what they had gone through. But something that really helped me was looking up a podcast about the subject and listening to other people having similar experiences. So not just focusing on like, how is my friend experiencing this, but hearing from other people, even indirectly through a podcast, that have gone through something similar, and realizing, okay, there is a whole community of people who have had this experience. I'm not one of them, but how can I educate myself so that the next time my friend comes to me with something, I can pull from other places and really solidify myself as a person who can support them in this.
Thank you, Shannon. I know we have a couple more questions, but given that time is limited, we just have time for one more. So I'm sorry if we didn't get to your question. We'll do our best to answer that in the chat below. But this comes from Ash. As BIPOC patients, how can we bring these frameworks into mental health care settings with us and bring this into our own patient advocacy? Any thoughts?
I'll kick it off. I have so many thoughts about this. We spend a lot of time in our work thinking about inside and outside strategies, and what does it mean to bring this analysis around structural violence and systemic oppression into these settings where folks are supposed to be receiving care. So, I think you have to start with people who are you're in relationship with and places where you have influence. As a former organizer, I'm always thinking about an organizing strategy. And when I used to work in systems, I saw a lot of people using strategies where they were trying to push something where there wasn't really fertile ground for it, right? And so starting with a few folks who might be aligned with, having a different conversation around white supremacy and racism, a different conversation around queer and transphobia, and being able to leverage relationships with people with power and authority. And so I work with a lot of folks who are trying to do that work in organizations as psychotherapists and practitioners, and to just know that work is really important, that work is really hard, and when you can do it not in isolation, it's way more effective, and it also is just so much better for your own mental health, because these structures are set up to be slow to change, and they're set up to maintain the status quo. And so having support inside the system is useful, and then having support outside the system is also really helpful.
Thank you, Erica. Natalie.
Yes. Erica brought up something in me that I think has just been something that I've been grappling with as a therapist, when I go to trainings, most trainings are facilitated by white cis individuals. And when they are facilitated by white cis individuals, it is going to come from that kind of framework. And therefore, you know, BIPOC individuals are going to these trainings because we want to get these certifications. We want to, you know, eventually one day become trainers, but the framework continues to be the same. And so what I want to see and what needs to happen is that more of these trainings are led by BIPOC individuals, by people from marginalized groups that are leading these trainings, so that it offers more of an inclusive, holistic, just framework that it really truly embodies everyone's experience. That I feel like is the foundation of, especially when we're talking about how do we bring this framework into the mental health setting as therapists. It is to attend trainings that are led by us.
Thank you, Natalie.
Yeah, and I would love to add on top of the beauty that was already given by Erica and Natalie, that we can ask for what we need. But as Erica said, there's certain places that it's not safe enough to do that. And the systems will continue to swallow us whole. And I can identify, you know, I work in one of them, you know, so it's often really important, as I'm just, again, reiterating what Erica said and just adding another little twist, which is, I think it's so important to do it in community and to recognize like our capacity as well, of like how far we can push. I would also say that as people receiving services, you have so much power, right? I tell this to my students all the time at schools, like, y'all get to ask for what you need. You can tell, you know, the faculty what you need. You're paying the tuition, you know, so if you all are not there paying that tuition, then what happens really to the institution? So I try to also empower my clients, the people that I serve, as well as my students, to learn to ask for what they need in a way where it will be heard, in a way where they remain authentic to their true selves. So that it's not only me who has already gone through this system and has some level of privilege, right? Like as a doctor, but also allowing them to see what it's like to organize together. You know, what are some of the pitfalls? What do we come up against? And even if you're one-on-one and you're going in to go to therapy, you can say, I'd like to know a little bit about what your perspective is on healing justice, or what's your perspective on anti-oppressive psychotherapy or mental health awareness. Like, as people receiving services, we have a right to ask for what we need. But I know for myself, growing up in an immigrant family, I often heard like, your doctor knows best. This person knows best. Like, you don't ask questions. So I just want to reaffirm for anyone out there that is like, I don't get to ask that. I should be happy enough to have services, that you have a right to ask for what you need. And if you're not getting it in one place, then it means it's time to go elsewhere to get those needs met.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, Lorenzo, Natalie, Shannon, Erica, Dr. Mullan, this has been truly wonderful to get to speak with you all. I am truly honored. I know our community is honored to get to hear from you all, and I know it means a ton to our community to get to see and hear from each of you today. So thank you so much for your time and all of the knowledge that you shared today. It truly, truly means the world. So thank you all. To everyone out there, you can of course learn more and check us out at bornthisway.foundation. You can of course find inspirational content and share your own stories at channelkindness.org. And I really encourage you to check out all of the resources and information that each one of our panelists shared here today. So to everyone out there, I'm so glad you're here with us, and thank you all so much again. We'll see you all soon. Bye, everyone.